Hello, my name is Gunnar Clovis. I'm a game developer. The following is a presentation I gave over a year ago now about accessibility in game design, a topic I'm very passionate about. The original footage for this presentation was unfortunately lost by the AV department of the venue, so the footage that we have is this basically home video recording that an audience member took and was kind enough to share with us. So thusly the audio and visual quality is not the best. I've tried my best to remix and repair the audio quality as best I could, but it was recording the audio from like 30 feet away without a proper microphone. So it's unfortunate. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. The details about me personally were basically outdated within a month of when I originally gave the presentation. Those are not really accurate. I've been working different jobs since then. So you can ignore that bit. But I do hope you enjoyed the presentation. I worked really hard on it back then. Remember to love each other, respect your friends, be loyal to one another, always assume the best of people, and have a lovely day. Please enjoy my presentation.
There is something wrong with you. The very fact that you're sitting in this room, the fact that you're a human animal listening to me this very moment, I can all but guarantee that there are many, many things wrong with you, both physiologically and psychologically. And that's okay. None of us are perfect. The closest to being perfect among us are the astronauts, those truly special individuals with the right stuff, who have to fulfill a bevy of rigorous requirements, with much of which are unfairly determined by birth. They have to be a specific height, have the right eyesight, no psychiatric disorders, no history of marital problems, speak Russian, be phenomenally educated, be exceptionally skilled, be extraordinarily fit and healthy. Nearly 20,000 U.S. citizens applied to join NASA's 2017 astronaut class, and only 12 were selected. Life is unfair. We can't all be astronauts. But we can all be superheroes, or spies, or the hero of Mushroom Kingdom, or a grizzled soldier. I love that word. And the Dragonborn, an archmage, an assassin, a parkour expert, a hacker, a cowboy, a Jedi, a hot dad, a green cyborg robot ninja dude, heisting criminals, the winner of the FIFA World Cup, or maybe just the very best like no one ever was. And even astronauts, but you get it. This does actually really hurt me, even as a man, because my two favorite games of all time are Portal and The Last of Us, both of which feature female protagonists, but I was trying to do a quick reel bit, and Tenacious Wormhole Device, Test Subject, Manipulative Device, Psychotic AI, and orphaned fungus zombie apocalypse survivor, immune to the fungus zombie plague, just don't roll off the tongue like superhero or cowboy, but I digress. Video games allow us to be something we're not, and do things we can't. And it doesn't take long, we're talking to people to find amazing, inspiring stories about how video games have shaped and improved their lives. On that note, I really recommend Extra Credits' series, Because Games Matter, which has some truly incredible personal narratives about how video games literally save someone's life. Extra Credits has a very special place in my heart, and is a further catalyst for me to actually pursue my education in game design development, as its writer, James Burnell, was a former game design professor at my own university. Okay. We're all here because we love games, right? For different reasons, but at the core of it, there's something that hooked us, that made us want to be game developers. Game development is an industry of passion. It's not a great field to make tons and tons of money unless you're already a massive company. It's an industry of hits, like all entertainment media. So the overwhelming majority of game developers are simply people fueled by love and passion for the medium, particularly independence. I know that describes a lot of you in this room right now. Games are for everyone. Rest in peace, Satoru Iwata. Half of all gamers are female. Get that misconception out of your head right now. And despite still being an incredibly new medium, gamers are of all ages. My grandmother loves to play Plants vs. Zombies on her iPad. My 8-year-old half-brother loves to play Super Mario on his Switch. Games, like any other entertainment medium, are for all people. Yet games are different than other media. Whereas movies and music are very passive, simply sitting back and watching and or listening, games are by their very definition interactive. They require you to interact with them. That's fine for the quote-unquote average person, a person who doesn't actually exist. But what if you have carpal tunnel? What if you have carpal tunnel? Or you're colorblind? That would actually look the game's unplayable. Or you can't walk, or you don't have an arm. One of my favorite phrases is that it's hard to look beyond your own experiences. You're you. You've only ever been you, if you remember it, and it's impossible for you to know what it's truly like to be anyone else. Games are our best way of getting close, but it's very important to remember that there are other people that have disabilities and impairments different than you that can inhibit their ability to play and enjoy games. Before we go any further, who am I? Howdy, if you don't know me already, my name is Gunnar Clovis. I've been making games in some form or another for maybe 10 years, depends on how you find it. Mostly as a hobbyist, later as a student, and most recently as a professional. I've always been making little card and board games for as long as I can remember. But I really got my start in game design as a modder for Portal 2 so long ago now. I was even fortunate enough to be featured in some community Let's Plays, which was very flattering, particularly for my age. I grew up fairly poor, just technically in legal poverty, which was a major barrier to my ability to learn and create games, but I was extremely committed towards doing so. My household already lied about where we lived in government just to keep me in the same school district and school, and we moved between various unstable housing, and I got a special waiver on top of that to go to a very specific high school. This is the only school around that had a computer science wing, and offered courses in game development with a special affiliation with my dream university. Actually ended up spending the money I was supposed to use for food just for gas so I could drive here every day. It was a thing. The courses there didn't actually teach me that much, but allowed me time to teach myself, which I mostly did by reading University of Chicago college textbooks and executing practical applications. Taught myself to develop in C, C++, Java, Assembly, C#, most of the major programming languages used in game development, as well as some proprietary ones, and I even created my own as needed. I made dozens of games for my private groups of friends of various types and sizes. I'm actually moving this week, and so I'm having some trouble finding the files, so the images here are not the best, so please excuse me. From comedic dating sims to procedurally generated shooters, I developed custom 2D and 3D game engines from scratch, which was always a great learning experience. I taught computer science and game development as a tutor and teacher for several years, which was extremely rewarding. I ran a group for it, I volunteered nearly all of my time, and transitioned to being a student teacher for the AP Computer Science class. These are all the kids I taught. We had a big event for it. It was a good time. Passed up opportunities to pursue education at Harvard and Yale to instead attend my lifelong dream school, which is a Digipen Institute of Technology in Redmond, Washington. It is a very stupid name, but it was the first university in the world to offer a degree in game development, or real-time interactive simulation, founded by former chairman of Nintendo Software Technologies, Claude Comera. It's still the best school in the world for game development, at least in my opinion, if you use industry awards and average graduate salary as a metric like I do. After my freshman year, I was waived into higher courses, including the master's level, but for a variety of personal reasons I dropped out, which I could easily justify because I had multiple jobs both in and out of the game industry, making pretty good money. However, due to medical reasons, my family relocated me here to Vegas, and thusly I had to give up my work in Washington without warning. I've been doing contract and consulting work. I've been working with the International Gaming Institute on some casino gaming patents and games. I'm not allowed to really talk about any of it in specifics. I'm writing a book indirectly related to game development, and I'm starting a game studio. It's a very temporary look. Unfortunately, I'm not able to show anything I worked on professionally in Seattle, only my old hobbyist and student titles, or any of the casino products I'm currently developing, as I'm under very strict NDA. It's an unfortunate reality of the game industry that projects are canceled or put on indefinite hold in this development hell all the time, and even if they do come out, it can take years after leaving the studio. So that's why I started Some Guy. It's a self-deprecating little indie outlet for me to begin selling my own work without the concern of it never coming out due to dev hell or whatever it is. However, my first title has predictably ballooned in scope, and the entire enterprise is very much a side gig, so it's a bit of time. I was actually just taking solace in the GDC talk by Tom Francis about scope changes, heat signature, and gunpoint. If you're not familiar with Tom Francis, I really recommend checking out his game development blog. I've always very personally resonated with him. Perfectionism and difficulty focusing have always been imperfections of mine. Very imperfect. In terms of today's topic of accessibility and in the spirit of candor, some of my impairments include nearsighted, one eye, farsighted the other. I can't breathe out of my nose most of the time due to childhood injury. My spine is just super messed up. I get carpal tunnel, which I've actually been having while I've been standing up here. I have a lisp, I'm prone to headaches, I have this infirmity in my left foot tendon that makes it difficult for me to run, walk, or stand for a long time. I have hyperthyroidism, I'm dyslexic, I'm mildly autistic, I have extremely severe depression and I have very severe anxiety, I'm near-touch synesthesia due to heightened affective and pain empathy, and that was much more pronounced when I was younger, and many other things. Well, it may not be immediately obvious how all of these problems, several of which are extremely common, can and do inhibit me from enjoying games at times. Though they admittedly more impede my ability to make games as effectively as I used to. My imperfections are less prohibitive than someone that was, say, blind or deaf or missing a limb or had a more severe cognitive disorder, though every single one of my impairments can potentially be relevant to a game. There's no impairment that's kind of too small to not consider inaccessibility. I'll be discussing many of these impairments I can in this lecture and how to design games accommodating them. Also note that I'm the vice chair of the IGDA Las Vegas board of directors. All that means is I just help run event management and I edit the YouTube videos. That's all that means to say that title. I care very deeply about game accessibility. It's something that affects me personally, though if you realize it or not, it affects nearly everyone. My uncle, who I grew up around a lot, is one of the world's leading prostheticists. I can say that word. So I was very exposed to many amputees at a young age, which ingrained a deep-rooted soft spot in me for disabled. As I mentioned before, I'm writing a book, and every creative writing project I take, I always subconsciously focus on disabled protagonists. It's just something I really care about. I've studied the topic of game accessibility for many years, and I'm always endeavoring to learn more about it, as with anything. It's something I think very earnestly about when designing a game or giving advice to someone else's. It's really hard, as I said, to look beyond your own experiences. You might think you are, but you don't know what you don't know. It's literally impossible to. I love listening to other people talk about their unique experiences in games and in life and offering me unique perspectives I never would have considered on my own. For example, while helping exhibit at the NAB 2018 show this year with Connor Torres and Alex State, who is not here tonight, he's traveling, okay. I had this really wonderful conversation with this young woman about her long, extended painted fingernails and how that distracted her from playing many touchscreen mobile games. That's so outside of my life, my thoughts, my experiences, I never would have considered it. But now, it's something I think about very deliberately for any and all future games I play. Quick aside, I'll be attempting to blend humor and into this presentation, despite it being potentially a very personal and somber subject matter in disability. If I have caused or later caused offense to anyone in any way at all, I'm deeply sorry. That's not my intent, though I recognize that that doesn't mean much. The terms for some of these topics can be very tricky. I'll be using the word impairments as an umbrella term to describe anything from ADHD and carpal tunnel to paraplegia and blindness. I'll also occasionally use the word imperfection in reference to the arguably illusory concept of the perfectly healthy human being. We are all perfect in our own imperfections, I mean no offense. If you feel I've done an especially poor job with this presentation or have caused offense, or you have any other notes, please tell me so via Twitter at @GoToClovis, AR, V as in Victor. Your list of imperfections is certainly different than mine. But when designing games, it's important to look beyond yourself. Why is it important? Well, this talk isn't really about that. If you don't intrinsically see the value in facilitating people with disabilities to play their games, then you just need to develop a bit more empathy, I feel. It's not that games are just as important to people with disabilities. Often, they're even more so. Often, disabled children don't have the same access to social situations others take for granted, such as a child in a wheelchair being unable to play football or soccer. And games are vitally important to them in providing a social setting where their inability to walk doesn't inhibit them. But designing for disability in games is also just simply better business. Still, so many games don't consider their colorblind players, their hard of hearing or deaf players, their players with impairments that affect their motor skills. And so, what do you think happens? Those players leave. If you can't play a game, then you're not going to play the game. You're not going to buy that game or any future games from that title. The few games that do ensure accessibility are lauded and beloved by their disabled players. It's a good way to win awards and be newsworthy. If that's your goal in designing accessible games, well then, I personally think you're a kind of bad person, but it's good business, and you'd still be improving the landscape, so by all means. Okay, well, you might be thinking, is it really worth it? How many disabled gamers are there? Surely they can't make up the development costs for changing the game just for that. Well, you'd be wrong about that. Well, I, of course, can't cover every type of disability and impairment. I'm going to talk about some of the major visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive impairments, and how you can cheaply and easily design better, more accessible games for each type. And again, there's something wrong with you, with all of you, with all of us. Virtually everyone has and or will later develop some type of impairment. 1 in 5 people are dyslexic. 1 in 12 men are colorblind. According to our current data, 1 in 68 people are autistic, though researchers believe the true number is much higher. 1 in 9 people have ADHD. More than 65 million people have epilepsy. I could keep going, but hopefully you get the point. Designing for accessibility doesn't just help people with these specific impairments. Designing for accessibility almost always causes a phenomenon called the curb cut effect. If you're not familiar, curb cuts are those little smooth divots in sidewalks and street corners. They're created specifically for people in wheelchairs, so that they could have increased freedom of movement and crossing the street, not having to have their chair awkwardly lifted on and off the sidewalk. However, while curb cuts were designed and implemented with only the disabled in mind, pretty immediately it was found out that curb cuts benefited universally everyone. Any parent pushing a stroller, cyclists, skateboarders, roller skaters, and especially any delivery person with wheeled cart goods. Curb cuts may have been designed for the disabled, but they ended up helping everyone and inspiring the entire field of universal design, where buildings, systems, and objects are designed to be as usable as possible for all people, regardless of age, size, or ability. This phenomenon is true of most accessibility features. Curb cuts have become so commonplace that we forget their origins as assistive technology for the disabled. They're simply normal. To blatantly quote Medium, when assistive technology becomes sufficiently ubiquitous and widely used, it is no longer considered assistive technology. It becomes normal. Curb cuts are far from the only case of this. Captions are another rather ubiquitous technology that started out as an accommodation for the deaf and hard of hearing. I prefer to use subtitles when I watch media, so do many others. It's essentially a requirement for all major video platforms, like YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, etc. And in studies, nearly all students said that captions are helpful in academic content. 98.6%, like you don't get much higher in statistics. Their reason for doing so is overwhelmingly as a learning aid, not as a disability accommodation. Accessible technology is good for everyone. And this is just as true in games. Designing for disability is not dumbing down a title. It's not wasted development time. Adding subtitles, options for bigger text, remappable controls, UI improvements, effective tutorials, and quality of life options benefit everyone. And if you design your systems with these ideas in mind from the outset, they're generally going to be extremely cheap and easy to implement. However, I should also address about the only counter-argument for designing for accessibility. The Souls series is known for its brutally punishing difficulty, and this makes it a difficult game for many players to get into. If you're a working parent with only a half hour to play games before you absolutely need to go to sleep, or if you have any number of cognitive, motor, or visual impairments, then Dark Souls may simply be unplayable for you, with too large of a time investment to get good. This caused quite a stir a few years ago with arguments for why Dark Souls should or should not have an easy mode. Despite being such an advocate for game accessibility myself, I personally lean towards the latter category. If you as a developer feel that adding certain accessibility features, such as difficulty modes, options to tweak or disable QuickTime events, etc., would destroy your game design and the atmosphere of your title, then of course you are and should be free to leave your game as is, and not buckle to make it easier for certain players. But you should always be supremely aware of the audience you're alienating from your title by doing this, and the potential financial consequences and such, and fully understand all of the accessibility features you're passing over. This is a learn the rules before you break them type of thing. 2018 Celeste is another incredibly difficult game, and has hidden extra hard versions of each level, and then even more hidden extra hard versions after that. Yet they implemented an optional mode, simply and uncondescendingly known as the system mode, where players can tweak the game's mechanics and even run speed to personalize its difficulty. This was met with an avalanche of praise and press, certainly factoring into the game's remarkable rate of success. It's my personal belief that when you get a blind player to effectively and happily play your game, then you're doing a lot of stuff really, really right. Hopefully by this point you understand that the social, the personal, the academic and financial benefits of game accessibility, and you're on board with me to learn how to actually implement it. The rest of this presentation will be a walkthrough of specific features you can implement in combat to combat different player impairments, segregated into 3 strata based on their level of difficulty to implement. Basic, intermediate, and advanced. These 3 tiers, or a slight variant of them, are very commonly used in game accessibility documentation and research, including by Level Access, AbilityNet, and game accessibility guidelines. The following information comes from those sources, as well as my education, my private study, my practical experience, and my personal library, as well as a few other good online resources that I'll link to at the end of this presentation. The slide deck will be available online after the video recording goes live on our IGDALB YouTube channel. The presentation link there as well. We'll also note that a lot of these ideas are still hotly debated in the game advocacy community, as game accessibility is still in its very early stages, but hopefully you'll find them useful. Most game accessibility implementations are fairly simple and cheap to do if they're done at the beginning of development of a project, as I said, and factored into the design from the outset. Many of these features will quickly rack up in cost if shoved into the end of a production lifecycle. So keeping that in mind, new game developers can try to implement these concepts into their projects from the beginning. That describes it here, whereas more experienced, grizzled veterans in the middle of a project will have to utilize their superior skill and knowledge to implement them midway or hold them off until their next project. Okay. Are you ready? If not, too bad, it's happening anyway. I'm going to try to move along that quickly. So let's start with visual impairments, which is often the easiest to fix for. And the basic implementations, which are cheap and easy to implement, while at the same time being very wide-reaching and useful for almost any type of game. No crucial information should ever be conveyed through only color. This is primarily fixed for colorblind players, of which there are very many, as I said before. However, it is useful for all people. The delightful little indie puzzle platformer Hue it's entirely designed about this color swapping mechanic, and it would be completely unplayable for many colorblind gamers. In the options, a simple icon can be applied to signify each color, instantly solving the issue. And as Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit, which I also really recommend, demonstrates in his video on designing for colorblind gamers, Chromagun, which starts a puzzle mechanic based around mixing all the different primary colors. They have a very unique little symbol system to represent each secondary color in combination, and then black in the center. Let's see how that works. I'm really a big fan of that. This is in particular vital for interactive elements, virtual controls on the touch screen or anything with a small view screen. This benefits players with low light vision, but also just as a simple UI improvement for everyone. All default text fonts should be large, clear, well-spaced and readable. This is achieved by their font size, their color, their style, their background, their formatting. Games do not yet have a consistent caption format, unlike film. A quick study of how films format their captions very clearly, very consistently, and simply, often on a contrasting, transparent background would be a huge help. I'm not making a statement on The Last Jedi, it's captioned well, like all films. If you're making a 3D game, the camera's field of view is a vital element to your game. Ideally, this should be adjustable, but at the very least, the default field of view should have the expected angle. Extreme viewing angles can quickly cause nausea and disorientation, particularly to certain players that get motion sickness. This can make your game completely unplayable if not really done. A rough estimate for the expected angle on a monitor is 90 degrees, whereas the TV is closer to 60 degrees. Too low field of view can make your players physically very sick. And if it's locked there, especially on the PC, then you can expect a very hearty amount of anger. Moving on to the intermediate difficulty changes, so it should require a bit more forethought and effort, but generally are just good practice. Again, with the field of view, make it adjustable, which requires very little work. It's as easy as that, should be trivial in any modern game engine. There should also be options to resize the interface elements, choose crosshair colors, different sizes and designs, adjust the contrast, swap out the UI elements for colorblind players, ideally with I think these slides got mixed up. I apologize. Yeah, so that is the choose crosshair colors and sizes and designs. Just contrast. Okay. Swap out the UI colors for colorblind players, ideally with a Photoshop-like little color picker. You want to show this all in the options menu as well. Like, nothing's worse than the options menu where you're changing it, you don't know what it's actually going to look like. You have to hit apply, and then it's going to mess up the movie again. So I'll show in the options. You should have an option to disable background animations, and for any 3D game, an option to adjust or disable any differences in controller movement and camera movement. This is commonplace in head bobbing, pretty much any 3D game FPS. You guys always bob his head where the weapon is, or there's mouse movement. In terms of audio, all music and sound effects for important objects and events should be very clearly distinct from one another. Separate volume controls and mute buttons should be offered for different sound effects, speech and background music, respectively. Everyone uses this to rebalance the audio as needed. This is really mandatory if you're making a game. And finally, use surround sound, if possible, which helps players with poor vision identify objects and events just by sound. This is how blind gamers can play just by very rich soundscapes. Blind gamers can actually even become competitive in fighting games where the sound design is especially effective. Like watching gameplay is amazing. No information should ever be conveyed by only a visual or a sound. You want it to combine both the visual and the sound to indicate everything to the players, regardless if they're low vision or hard of hearing. On a mobile device, be sure to support screen readers for low light vision and blind readers. Any website or manual that comes up from the game should also support screen readers. If you don't know, screen reader is for someone that can't see very well, can't read, and just speaks them out to them. And some general design advice: never place critical information on the side outside the player's eye line. So many vision impairments can result in a loss of peripheral vision. Well, players will familiarize themselves with the perpetual HUD elements placed centrally along the edges of the screen. Any temporary interface elements placed outside central focus will often go unseen, such as the God of War 3. And will quick time events and the buttons showing the sides. So if you have low light vision, you just don't see that button, and it becomes very quickly unplayable. And make it clear which interactive elements are interactive to help players distinguish between interactive in-game objects and UI elements. A simple mouse over or glow effect can achieve this, but as well as a clear, consistent contrast in style or icon. And the advanced adaptations, which are usually more difficult to implement and often only serve to specific niche impairments and game mechanics. Give full options to resize the font. Okay. This one applies to pretty much any game. It can be very difficult to do, especially if you don't do it right in the beginning. It's extremely difficult. In a complex game's problem, it's development, but it's, strongly recommend this. For games that have a large amount of text, such as a digital trading card games like Hearthstone, offer text resizing and let the text scroll in the box as is common on the internet. We've seen that. A night mode for your game, or at least certain UI elements, would be extremely helpful to players with vision strain and a welcome benefit to all players. A night mode where blue light is filtered out, potentially to an adjustable extent, is being increasingly commonplace in software. Within a few years or so, it's anticipated that it's an expected feature of any app. Games are different than word processors or internet browsers, but there's so many types of games that would benefit immensely from this type of option, particularly text-heavy ones. It's something to consider, at least. With the exception of mobile devices, complex analog inputs such as joysticks and mice can be very difficult for a low-vision gamer to use, as they're unable to see precisely where they're facing or where the cursor is. Having an option to rebind the complex analog input into digital input, so that's a binary 1 or 0 instead, such as keys and buttons, is a massive boon to these gamers and several other types, making no analog input required, but merely a supplementary or alternative input method. Alternative input methods are always a good idea, but we'll get to that more a bit later. Creating pre-recorded voiceovers for all text, including menus and installers, is a lot of work, but hugely beneficial feature to players with vision impairments as well as all others. If you look at the codex reader in the Mass Effect games, for instance, adds a lot more flavor and atmosphere to the game as well, while being very helpful. You can manage that, which is, again, completely understandable, offering full screen reader support, including for menus and installers, is a very viable alternative. This is especially useful for interface or text-heavy games, such as visual novels and digital board games. To help players that are on the far end of the low vision spectrum, an audio description track, which describes what's happening visually, is incredible. Look again to the film industry for effective examples. This can allow blind players to play a game completely with ease. It's really incredible when that happens. A sonar-style paintable audio map can additionally make very complex 3D environments navigable by people with very little residual vision. That's very rarely done. So, the 3D environment, as you move closer to each wall, there would be different sound effects. So, make a blind player be able to play a game. And that's all for the vision impairments. There's, of course, plenty more that could be done, but that's already more than enough. Many of these features, such as the font and interface resizing, contrast and UI elements, etc., help not only colorblind and low vision players, but anyone playing on a TV across the room or a particularly small screen, or anyone who just has difficulty focusing, etc. There's much less to be done as a games designer for players with hearing impairments in contrast to vision impairments. We begin to see that many of these accessibility implementations overlap, so I'll be skipping it a bit more and we'll become a bit faster. Basics, subtitles should be available for all important speech, and they should be clear, readable, no information should be conveyed by only sound, but a combination of visuals and sound. And separate channel volume sliders should be available for the sound effects, dialogue, and music. Or intermediate changes, so it's only just shorter. Providing additional subtitles for supplementary speech. One of my favorite games, Dragon Age Origins, is excellent at this, separating different important dialogue and background dialogue into two distinct caption modes. Again, sound effects and music should also be stratified into separate channels, along with each type of dialogue for independent manipulation. This can let your hard of hearing players manipulate background noise to be quieter in the speech. If you do not provide these volume sliders, then you should be very wary to balance your audio as such by default so that the speech can be heard over the much quieter backgrounds. Captions or subtitles should or should be able to be turned on before any sound is played. If you're wondering what's the difference between a subtitle and captions, subtitles are printed transcripts of dialogue, whereas captions are on-screen text designed for the hard of hearing, additionally describing sound effects, music, etc. Often they're used interchangeably, particularly in games. The extent to which closed captioning for the hard of hearing is offered can vary wildly in games, but obviously the more thorough and the more options, the better. Indication of who's speaking in subtitles is also very welcome via tags or color changes. Options to customize subtitle or caption presentation are hugely helpful to those with hearing impairments, such as font size, color, background box color size, and transparency. For multiplayer games, both text chat and voice chat should be offered, despite how toxic online multiplayer communities can become. Giving options to censor or mute specific players, teams, groups, or channels saying both text and voice chat is less of an accessibility feature and more of a hard requirement for any multiplayer game. Giving an option in a multiplayer game to set a matchmaking preference to not only queue with players who are specifically willing to only play with voice chat or only play without voice chat is also hugely beneficial to all players, but particularly those who are hard of hearing, as they can be might be intentionally kicked or excluded from games due to their inability to use chat effectively. This is back in Halo Reach, a great system for this. Christian Allen made it. Additionally, multiplayer visual means of communication in addition to audio are very necessary. Look to the communication wheel in Overwatch or the very specific and effective visual commands in Forza 2 Co-op. And a pretty sneaky option I never would have thought of until I spoke to a unilaterally deaf player at G2E some years ago is to provide a stereo mono toggle. I never understood the need for mono-channel audio in the modern landscape. But for someone that has difficulty localizing sounds or hearing them hearing them at all through the wrong stereo channel due to unilateral deafness, which means they can only hear on one ear, swapping the sound mix to a single channel can single-handedly make an unplayable game just perfectly enjoyable. The more advanced and accessibility features for hearing impaired players include cutting down and pasting subtitles and captions at appropriate words per minute for the target age group. Ideally with user options to regulate this. Speech is often done faster than reading, particularly for many of us that struggle to read due to dyslexia or some other condition. Again, look to the established guidelines in the film industry for words per minute, depending on each group. And providing signing, as in sign language, in games is rarely ever seen, but it's highly lauded. As I mentioned before, the entire field of game accessibility is still in its relative infancy, but signing in games is even more uncharted than the rest. There's very, very fertile ground in the industry to research, study, learn, and implement systems of sign language in games. Meaning that if you made the next game that implemented sign language, you'd get a ton of press and money, I guarantee it. This, if you didn't realize from the earlier slide, this is a Quill from the VR game Moss. It's animated to perform a little simple expression American Sign Language. So this game doesn't even actually have sign language. It's Moss just communicates through little squeaks and nonverbal gestures to the player. I believe it's a PSVR game. And the lead animator just animated him doing sign language, and it blew up. Like he gained a bajillion followers, and it was very fertile ground for this. Motor impairments are perhaps the easiest to understand when designing accessible games. One of the most basic and impactful combinations that a developer can make is line controls to be fully remapped and reconfigured. Overwatch is another really great example of this. This is the expectation in PC games, but less often seen on console. However, there's no real excuse not to do this. Don't rely on controller remapping on console level. You have to change it for each game. It wouldn't affect if you have a game like Overwatch that has multiple heroes or anything of that sort. That doesn't work. You have to do it in your game. You should also allow adjustment for all sensitivities. Your default controls should be as simple as possible. Make all of the areas of the UI be accessible through the same input methods as the gameplay. Supporting additional input devices is fantastic, though a bit more complex. Keyboard, mouse controller with rebindable controls is a very solid base. For those with difficulty mashing buttons and QuickTime events, provide alternatives or avoid them entirely. Providing alternatives to holding the button down is also very helpful to certain gamers as well. Of course, not use QuickTime events, that's also good. On PC, support window mode, so you have compatibility with virtual keyboards. That's very helpful to a lot of players. Adjusting the game speed, as I mentioned before, in Celeste is hugely helpful. Make multiple simultaneous actions optional with alternatives, like clicking and dragging. A lot of people can't do that if they have different motor impairments, or swiping, where it's clicking and dragging just on a tablet. If you're starting out a mobile game, designing it to be played in either portrait or landscape mode is a huge deal for impaired gamers. However, if you choose between the two, generally choose portrait mode for a variety of reasons, not all of which are encompassed by accessibility. This is very advanced, very difficult to do, and it can be very expensive, so it's an option. Do not require precise timing as a necessity for gameplay. This is common in games, but if there's an alternative assist mode, which is not Friday, can alienate. If there's no assist mode, it can alienate a very large amount of players, and myself is one of them. I struggle with times. If you want to design a game compatible with assistive technologies such as a Switch or eye tracking, if you want your Steam Hawking to be able to play your game, then you need a very simple control scheme that's integral to your game's design. And finally, cognitive impairments. This encompasses a wide variety of conditions, however, many can be alleviated through the same simple changes in the game's design. Letting the game be started without the need to navigate through multiple layers and menus is a huge deal. I look to Super Smash Bros. 4 for what not to do. This menu is terrible. There's a lot of essays and studies about this one. This menu is all horrible. Again, very easily readable default text, clear language, and simple text formatting. That's a must. Tutorials are sometimes controversial part of games design. I meant to put an image of the Cuphead tutorial up here, but it was running a bit short on time. That tutorial is going to be a horrible scar to a game, but generally a game lacking any kind of tutorial will end up being much worse. I love to talk about the art of tutorial design, but sadly I don't have time to do that for this presentation. I advise looking to my favorite game, though, which is Portal by Valve Software, for inspiration on the matter. However, because Portal is 70% tutorial. You don't really realize that. There are many ways to teach the player other than stopping the game and throwing pages of text. Allow players to progress through text prompts at their own pace. This is another case of the curve cut effect, as text prompts that wait for the player's input, of course, help those who need a bit more time to read each page. However, they end up helping everyone. It drives me insane when the game automatically moves through its text prompts, particularly when I get up to do some other task for a moment, thinking the game will pause on me and it just keeps going. For epileptic players, I don't know if it gets the surface, avoid flickering images and repetitive patterns. These patterns generally don't need to be in the game at all. But if you feel like they do, then warn the player clearly beforehand, perhaps several times, and provide an option to turn this off. Doki Doki Literature Club, another one of my favorite titles by Team Salvato, is a game best played as blind as possible in terms of knowledge to its content. However, it makes a clear warning at the start that waits for the player's input, we mentioned, that it may disturb certain players with depression or anxiety. I'm a strong believer in games that have serious, perhaps upsetting, impactful content in such a manner. However, a clear trigger warning, if you will, for this kind of content is a necessity. Of course, it takes all of 3 seconds to do. Some more complex accommodations to help players with cognitive impairments include providing contextual in-game tips and guidance. However, don't stop the game a la Skyward Sword for this kind of aid and allow the player to turn it off. Don't show these kind of hints without the player's consent. Show them the solution to a puzzle on screen just because the player got up to answer their phone for 10 minutes. That's really, really bad design. Ask the player if they want the hint and only reveal it if so. Similar reminders of controls and current objectives during gameplay are extremely useful, but again, dangerous to the player's sanity if overly done, without any way to turn them off or regulate them. These kind of reminders are useful not only to those who might have difficulty focusing, etc., but to players who may come back to a game after months of hiatus or simply overly absorbed in a tangential side quest in an open world game and forgot what they were doing beforehand. Providing gameplay thumbnails with save states is also a huge way to help alleviate these problems. That's in there. Another very easy implementation. Offering a means of practicing without failure, such as a shooting range or a sandbox, is a critical feature for all gamers. For certain gamers with cognitive impairments, it can be difficult to follow an overly long, convoluted narrative. Consider a clear, simple narrative structure instead. It's worked well so far for Mario. But if your long, overarching narrative is a core part of your game, then provide summaries of progress through a journal or a similar system, and simplify the game, and reminding players what was happening. At a higher level, allowing the player to disable all non-interactive elements in the game can be extremely helpful to people who may not understand the same metaphors or conventions as others. Removing all background elements can aid players with a much more profound impairments. But setting it as an option should give best of both worlds for all players. A symbol-based chat system is rarely seen in games, but hugely helpful for players with a no or low literacy. If you're developing a game for children or players with profound cognitive impairments, or you simply want to give them the tools to express themselves in your more traditional game, offering a symbol-based chat system is a great boon. Avoid sudden, unexpected movements or events, such as jump scares, which can make a game far more accessible for players with cognitive impairments, particularly with autism. This is a Civilization 5 with a simplified mode where it just removes all the quick movements and makes it far easier for a lot of people to play. I would recommend designing your games with such sudden events as optional, as they can force certain players to have to stop playing entirely. Together, players with ADHD or other difficulties focusing, allow all narrative and instructions to be replayed. This again helps players who want to return to a game after a long hiatus of playing. Providing an option to disable blood and gore can be a fairly advanced implementation. However, it's extremely useful to a variety of player cases, most often with children, of course. However, I have a meritus synesthesia, as I mentioned, which is a fairly rare condition. It was much stronger when I was young, but essentially due to my empathy, any sensation, and particularly pain, that I saw someone else experience, my mind bounced back onto me. I hated watching overly violent games and films. When I was very young, as seeing someone else be shot or cut up would cause me to experience an imagined facsimile on my body. I still feel that at times, but I've been incredibly desensitized over my life, of course. However, now and then, and sometimes, even now, I choose to disable blood and gore in games so as not to trigger that imaginary pain in myself. There are a lot of very niche conditions like that, such as face blindness, where a person cannot recognize distinct faces. Face blindness might not affect most games, but imagine playing a game like L.A. Noire. It's very dependent on the player's ability to tell characters apart and detect emotion when doing the interrogations. I'd perhaps argue that's a case like Dark Souls, where changing the game to accommodate that condition would fundamentally alter it too much and defeats its own purpose. However, it's definitely something to consider. autistic people may similarly struggle to recognize emotions and faces and body language in games, and providing alternatives to these kind of deductions are extremely beneficial. And that is about all the time I have. There are many more types of impairments to accommodate, particularly speech impairments, and new methods to be pioneered, as this is such a new topic in the new topic of discussion in the games industry. We're in a bit of a game accessibility wild west with no universally agreed upon guidelines for dealing with these issues. As I said before, film, all other media, they have very clear rules for how you're supposed to format captions. Games, each studio just makes it up, and gamers get really mad about that. Both of the techniques outlined here, again, many of which come from the game accessibility guidelines, which are striving to become that universally agreed upon guidelines set up for the game industry. Hopefully they were helpful to you. For any disability accommodation, however, it's a good bet to provide simply more options, as many options as you can, while still making the UI, UX for more options, for the options menu feel good. The options menu should typically be the very first thing a player sees when they boot up a game, even before your opening cinematic. Many players won't be able to understand or enjoy that opening cinematic if the visuals or the captions, etc., aren't tuned to their unique needs. It's hard to look beyond your own experiences. It's all well and good to think about designing for accessibility and running your game through colorblind, so simulacra filters and all that. But you'll never know what a certain type of person experiences within your game until they experience it. So my ultimate advice is the same for any lecture I used to give about game design or finding bugs, etc. And that's to play test. Have other people play your game as early as possible, as much as possible. Put it in front of the colorblind, dyslexic, low vision, hard of hearing players. They will tell you more than I or anyone else could about how to tune your game for accessibility. It's never been more important to talk about designing for accessibility in this increasingly diverse, connected market. And it's time that we look to make games for everyone. We can't all be astronauts, but we can all be gamers together. Thank you.